career coach, career strategist is really to help. I help senior leaders and executives who have come to that point in their career. I always call it career crossroads, where they know that they may just be ready for the next challenge and they have no idea what that is or how to get there. Or they may be dealing with a toxic environment and know that they just can't make change within their own environment or within their own organization. So they know they have to go somewhere else, or they just don't feel right and they don't know what to do. And so I help them work through a framework and process to answer some of those questions and find clarity. And I found that the framework and process of design thinking has really helped sort of lay the groundwork and lay the course for the process of taking those steps to figure it all out.
Welcome to the Improvement Nerds podcast, where we host conversations about the things that nerd us out with one goal in mind: sharing best practices and sharing techniques and tools that allow us to make lasting change. In each episode, we'll feature a different idea and hopefully through that episode give you a set of new tools, new skills, and new thinking that'll allow you to change how you do your work, how you lead others, and how you show up in your life. We're so excited that you've chosen to nerd out with us. We hope that these episodes are exactly the things that you need to hear in order to get started in making the improvements that you want to see happen in the world. If these episodes speak to you, please subscribe to our podcast, like what we're doing, and leave a comment.
And so you have to be curious when you're out there trying to figure out what your next step is going to be. Designers like to experiment. Which is hard when you're looking for your next career, because most of us are pretty impatient and just want to have the answers right away and to know right away what you're going to do next. But sometimes it is an experiment, and I take my clients through, talking to people, going out there and networking, asking questions about their other people's roles or industries, and seeing if that is something that they would even be interested in and want to do. Reframing problems is a huge one with designers and design thinking, and there's a lot of reframing that goes along with career coaching and designing your next career strategy because of our limiting beliefs. And in this book they call it dysfunctional beliefs, but they're just things that come up for all of us, so that block us from moving forward. So it's things like, I should know what makes me happy, or I'm not going to be able to get another job. I have too much experience, or nobody's going to pay me the salary that I'm looking for, or what if I'm not happy in my next role? So all of those things come up. And so I help clients reframe some of those limiting beliefs and thoughts that are coming up for them and look at it from a different perspective so they can get past those and move on. Designers also know it's a process for design thinking. And that's something when I'm talking to people right up front and we're deciding if it's a good fit for us to work together, I do say it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. There are a lot of steps that we need to take to build on one another and find answers. But I know for me, when I'm working with clients, with every session that we have, they're always closer to getting to the answer that feels good for them. But sometimes it's happens quicker than others. It really just depends. And I help them work through that.
Margaret Mead said it best when she shared that one should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that it was the only thing that ever had. I couldn't agree more. Let's get busy, Improvement Nerds. We got a lot of work to do. Good morning, Improvement Nerds. This is Tom. I'm back with another episode of the Improvement Nerds podcast, a podcast that's all about nerding out about the things that you're passionate about, the things that really get you going. And as you dive into those passions, you're able to make change and impact our world in a better way. So thanks for tuning into the podcast. Today, I've got a special guest, someone that I've met through LinkedIn. Our initial blushing when we came and connected with one another was through conversations about conscious capitalism. So that's how I originally got introduced to Marla. And then outside of that conversation, the two of us started to talk about some of the things she was doing with her small business. And she's a career strategist. She's amazing at what she does. And after I aired an episode on design thinking featuring Sheena Burt, Marla reached out and started to geek out and nerd out about how design thinking can be used in the career space and how individuals can navigate career transition and even define a dream career for themselves through the designer's mindset. So that as soon as she mentioned that, I'm like, that is an episode that we've got to make. And here she is today with me making that episode. So Marla, thank you and welcome to the episode.
Thank you. And it's great to be here. And I'm really excited to talk about this and just share my experience and what I've learned through the years and how I kind of upon design thinking and how I use it to help people navigate through their career change.
Great. So before I jump into that, I want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you. And you and I, we do a lot of interacting with each other through LinkedIn. Is that your preferred communication channel?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I usually am on LinkedIn most days and I check messages all the time. So connecting with me on LinkedIn and sending messages through LinkedIn is perfect. You can also reach me email. We're always on email all the time too. And that's Marla at shift-careercoaching.com. So either of those two ways is perfect.
Awesome. And Marla Holdread, her last name is Holdread.
Mhm.
And she's with Shift Leadership. Marla, is there a website out there as well that we could be sending people to?
Yes, I have a website. It's shift-careercoaching.com.
Awesome. All right, we got that out there. People, take advantage of this great resource. Look her up and get connected with her. We're going to dive in now. And Marla, you ready to nerd out?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So, you've already set the stage. We're going to be talking about the application of design thinking for individuals who are looking to more clearly define their career.
Yes.
And that is something I cannot wait to dive into. But I'm going to put a feather in that cap because we want to get to know you just a little bit before we immerse ourselves in that topic. So,
Yeah, certainly. So, my journey really began, and I'll really kind of go through my career journey because I always say my career journey has been unconventional. It's been one that turned into something that I really never imagined it would be. But it's one of the reasons why I love helping my clients and helping people navigate their careers now, is because when I was navigating my career path, I really didn't have anybody to help me answer some of those questions that I had. So, anyway, so I started out, I went to Ohio University, originally grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I moved to Chicago after graduation with big dreams of being in the public relations industry and communications industry. And at that time, when I graduated, the job market wasn't great. So I was literally pounding the pavement. I mean, I was walking. I had no contacts. I was walking around. At the time, there were no cell phones. I'm making myself sound very old, but I was I made appointments with people to have informational interviews just to try to get my foot in the door and get to know the industry a little bit more. Um, and actually, I met a lot of people, but that didn't really end up working for me. And I found that I needed a job because I was moving there. I had a couple of roommates, but I still needed to pay the rent and pay the bills. So I ended up, and this is kind of, if forget about this, it's a funny story, but my first summer that I actually moved to Chicago, um, I ended up working at the merchandise mart with one of my roommates. She was an interior designer and she worked for a company that made or they supplied materials for couches and draperies and different things. And my first job out of college was tagging those materials with different stickers depending on what the different sizes were. So it was one of those things where it was like I needed a job. I couldn't find one right away, and so I just got whatever I uh, could find in order to get some money coming in. And so eventually, I did end up uh, finding a job in the marketing area. I worked for a commercial real estate company there, and also for an architecture and interior design firm. So my time in Chicago is about there for about 5, 6 years, and I really got some foundational experience of just entry level marketing kind of work. But I worked with some extraordinary companies, so I learned a lot. Um, then I actually met my now ex-husband when we lived in Chicago, and we moved to Northwest Indiana, lived in Valparaiso for a little while. And again, I needed to find something, and the job market was a little different in Northwest Indiana than it was in Chicago. So I ended up starting to work for a staffing and recruiting company. And I jumped in without much experience, but I learned pretty quickly that I enjoyed people and working in that environment and helping them a little bit. Um, and so, kind of just jumping into that, and realizing that there weren't as many options in Northwest Indiana in terms of professional work than there was in Chicago. So we stayed there for a little bit. My ex husband's originally from Carmel, Indiana, and so we moved to Indianapolis and started a family. And so I took some time off of work, then ended up getting divorced and had to get back into the workforce. So I do get a lot of questions there too of how, what is that like taking some time off of work, getting out of the workforce, and then trying to figure out a way to get back in. And it was kind of my life story of jumping back into it and really not having a plan or a strategy, but just finding something that would keep the lights on, pay the bills, and it worked out in my favor. But I ended up working for as an office manager for a local house cleaning company, um, and I worked there for about a year actually. But I learned everything about small business, managing all aspects of that office. But unfortunately, it just didn't work with my schedule with the kids. So one thing led to another. I met someone through my son's kindergarten. We became friends, and then he hired me to be a managing editor for several neighborhood magazines. And so I went from being an office manager to an editor, where I interviewed people, I wrote stories, I took pictures, and I published all these magazines. Um, that job was great. I mean, it was very flexible because I was able to work from home. But again, after a couple of years there, I knew it was a building block to whatever my next step was. I didn't quite know what that was yet, but I did know that um, I wasn't, I needed to have a little more challenge. And so I did some networking and I joined a couple of networking groups. And I had a woman introduce me to Sally Tassani, who owns the Strategy Forum, which is a leadership and development consulting firm, and that's over in Carmel. Sally is an extraordinary businesswoman. She's been in business for many years, and we just connected immediately because she actually began her career in Chicago. So we just connected right away. She gave me a chance at doing business development, client services, um, and different work for her group and organization. And little did I know that I was going to fall in love with that. So that I feel like that's where my career kind of really began again was working for the strategy forums. I love the industry. We mainly facilitated mastermind groups for CEOs, presidents of companies. We had a group for HR leaders. And if you don't know what mastermind group, some people aren't familiar with the mastermind group, but basically it's a group of people who, professionals who come together and have peer collaboration and work together on their challenges, exchange ideas. Um, as our group at the Strategy Forum, we also did a little professional development type of work with them as well. Um, and so we did that kind of work. We also had executive coaching going on. And then we developed some leadership programs for big companies around, some teams at Eli Lilly. We went up to Whirlpool, which is in Benton Harbor, and put together some leadership work for their international teams there. And then we worked with a group of executives and physicians. They were actually both executives and physicians at Baptist Health in Louisville. So that experience really was like eye opening for me because it really finally felt like a great fit. I loved working with the people and helping them with whatever professional challenges they were having. Um, And sort of, like kind of what happened to me too, eventually, after about 5 years working there, I was ready. I knew I was ready for my next challenge. I didn't know what that was yet. And so when that happened, I had this feeling like, okay, I'm ready to do something next. I'm not sure what that is. I've got a list of things that I really enjoy. I have a list of things I don't really enjoy. What do I even do? Where do I go? And so I just started, LinkedIn job, looking at other jobs, um, kind of trying to figure it out on my own. Lucky for me, I eventually ended up um, talking with another woman who had her own coaching practice and working through a little bit about how that worked, and decided to go out on my own to do coaching. Um, and here I am. So my coaching now as a career coach, career strategist is really to help. I help senior leaders and executives who have come to that point in their career. I always call it a career crossroads, where they know that they may just be ready for the next challenge and they have no idea what that is or how to get there. Or they may be dealing with a toxic environment and know that they just can't make change within their own environment or within their own organization. So they know they have to go somewhere else, or they just don't feel right and they don't know what to do. And so I help them work through a framework and process to answer some of those questions and find clarity. And I found that the framework and process of design thinking has really helped sort of lay the groundwork and lay the course for the process of taking those steps to figure it all out. And so with my experience, even though it's been unconventional and kind of all over the place, I can relate so much to my clients because I've been there in that feeling of I have so many questions and I don't even know how to take the next step. And so that's how I help them.
Thank you for sharing your background and your journey and all the different careers that you tried on and experimented with to understand, is this something I enjoy, is this something that fills my cup, where's the growth within this, and even in some ways, what about this don't I like? And sometimes knowing what you don't like helps you find the next opportunity that's more aligned with the things you do like. So it sounds through your journey, it was different career experiences that you were pursuing, but it was also, you know, personal goals of, your around your family, and even different places that you wanted to experience for yourself. So picking where you wanted to reside and just going there first and then figuring it out after. I think a lot of people move for a job instead of move for the city. You kind of did it a little bit backwards. And I think that's a lot of for you to say, hey, I want to live in Chicago, and then just go to Chicago and figure it out there. And then, hey, there's, an opportunity to relocate into Valparaiso. I don't know what I'm going to do for a career there, but that's where we're going. I'm going to experience Northwest Indiana and then down here to Carmel. It sounds like, you know, that's relatable. There's probably a lot of individuals who have relocated without knowing what they were going to do for work and having to figure it out. And that can be very daunting. So I imagine you're meeting people at the career crossroads for that reason, change of city. Also, family circumstances of having children, and children going into grade school is another big transition for families, or even graduating and going on to college is a big career transition. So you can probably relate to those crossroads, and even what happens in people's marital status. You can relate to those changes because that's not always doom and gloom. I'm sure for those who are going through that transition, it is very painful, but in some ways, it's a good decision to make for both people. But as a result of that, it changes your goals and what you want for yourself. So that's another career crossroads. So it sounds like you've been in a lot of crossroads, and I think that helps you help individuals who are there themselves.
Yes. And I will say, I'm cognizant of the fact that I don't know if our the audience is with doing all this leadership and development work, I'm also an assessment nerd in addition to design thinking nerd and career nerd. But so I love assessments, and I've taken so many of them, and my poor family, I've had them take all these assessments as well, but we really know each other. And so one thing I am aware of, so on the DISC assessment, I'm a high I. And one thing about the high I personality, it really is like jump in and just try it and we'll figure it out as we go. That's not everyone's personality and comfort level. If there are, especially if you're a high C or an S on the disc, you're
Yeah.
much more, and especially with the process, you're much more, that's just very uncomfortable to do that. I mean, you have to have more information in order to just jump in and make it some of the decisions some of the things that I have done. And so I think, having some of those answers and clarifying some of the questions, for people who just aren't naturally inclined to jump in and do things, which I don't even know if I completely recommend that. I mean, it worked out in my favor, but sometimes I look back and I think, geez, I didn't think much about that. I wish I would have strategized a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that assessment tool and helping to kind of spotlight like these, look at them as resources. They really help you to understand how you interact with the world and interact with others and interact with conflict. There's a variety of them that are out there, and DISC is definitely one of those that is more mainstream, very popular, definitely within organizations. That's where I completed my DISC profile.
Mhm.
And I'm a high I myself. So we're talking about that fly by the seat of the pants type, figure it out as you go. I could totally relate to that. And then I can also totally relate to that causes anxiety and complete chaos and gets the C way out of their comfort zone. So, and I grew up in healthcare, and when you look at the data around that sector, about 60 to 70% of the workforce are C's or S's, conscientious or steady, and they're not for change. They will support it with enough data that suggests and allows them to
Yeah.
analyze and make an informed decision that change is important. So they're slower to change. They're risk adverse, which totally makes sense for nursing and people in healthcare. Is it's high stakes, right? You're treating and anything that goes wrong can cause harm to another individual. So they're very risk adverse as a result of that. So someone who comes in and is, let's just try it and see what happens, and thinks on their feet, and is a more risk accepting because they see that the risk often leads to reward, they could be quite counterculture. So my eye helped in a lot of ways, but it also had to be something like I had to promote with alongside a disclaimer to say like, this is just how I interact with the world, and I value your perspectives of being my cross and my balance, because I very optimistic. um Even taking disc and pulling it out of my profession of, I was a high I in healthcare. Here in my house, my wife is more of the C, she's the realist. So whenever it comes to like a big grand idea, I think elaborate and I think best case scenario, and I'm sure you can relate to that too.
Mhm.
That's fun, but it's also pretty risky. And it's good to have someone to offset that and ask the hard questions that you probably didn't think of. So the C's are typically those people who help you stay a little bit grounded in reality, and they make for a good combination. And so I think, the assessments are super helpful because they're just what I was talking about. I hope people can like connect to those things and say, hey, if I don't know my disc, it might be helpful so I can understand how I interact with the world and how I need to recruit people to my tribe to surround me to kind of keep me safe from myself, so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting about you and your wife, because my husband and I are the same thing. He's a high C and I'm a high I. So um, I think if we didn't know that about each other, we'd probably drive each other crazy. But since we do, we approach it as like no, this is good for us.
Mm-hmm. It is. You have to learn to work together instead of against each other and really play to each other's strengths of um, whether it's creativity or analytics or, you know, decisiveness, whatever those things might be, they could be a strength, but also a weakness. And it's good to know how you can get the best of both out of a team or a relationship or whatever. So, yeah, the disc is not just for professional life,
Right.
in a lot of different ways. And so, with all that said, I think you being an assessment nerd, it's obvious that you encourage people to do a little bit of self discovery as part of this process.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so, and also just a quick, I was thinking as we were talking too, that just a quick side note on a personal level, I'm remarried now and I have a blended family of five children, and they're all teenagers. It's five teenagers. So we use assessments and just, well, with teenagers, you never know what the heck is going to happen. So sometimes it's hard. But anyway, that's part of the personal story that I have too, is navigating my life here at home with everybody running all over the place and going through teenage years. But anyway, on a side note,
Oh yeah, I can totally see the assessment tools being helpful for teenagers and also for parents to know a little bit more about their kids. That's a brilliant idea. Thanks for suggesting use of these assessments from that perspective. I want to move us to a little bit about how you're using design thinking to help support your coaching clients through their self discovery and through identifying a career that fits their strengths but also fits their passions. How did all that get started?
a couple of years ago, I came across the Designing Your Life book written by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. They are two professors at Stanford. And they wrote this book based on their conversations and insights with college students that they worked with, just based on the fact that college students have a hard time figuring out, what I want to do with my life or where do I want to go. We always ask them those questions, and there's a lot of confusion and uh, just wondering, am I doing the right thing? Um, where do I even go with this? And so design thinking really helped create a framework and a path for their college students to have a strategy and figure out a way to work through how to really even take the first step on their first career and really feel confident that that's where they wanted to go next. So that book was inspirational to me, and in addition to working with clients on, when clients come to me, and I keep saying this, they're at a career crossroads, but really what's happening is they're just having a lot of questions that are unanswered. And so I help them work through that process of answering some of those questions. Um, they know the one thing they know is they're not feeling fulfilled. They know there's something out there that's next for them. But the unanswered questions are just things like, what is that? Or should I stay here? I have it pretty good. Am I too old to find something else? Am I, making too much money? What do I even want to do? And so all those questions that are coming up, I help them figure out and find clarity and be able to take a next step, whatever that may be. And the design thinking process has really helped from a career perspective, because it does take some thinking, and it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And we dig a little deeper in terms of looking at some of the root problems. And so um, I can tell you one thing I liked, I can relate a lot, and how I work with my clients a lot, particularly our designers are curious. And so you have to be curious when you're out there trying to figure out what your next step is going to be. Designers like to experiment. which is hard when you're looking for your next career because most of us are pretty impatient and just want to have the answers right away and to know right away what you're going to do next. But sometimes it is an experiment. And I take my clients through, talking to people, going out there and networking, asking questions about their other people's roles or industries and seeing if that is something that they would even be interested in and want to do. um, Reframing problems is a huge one in with designers and design thinking, and there's a lot of reframing that goes along with career coaching and designing your next career strategy because of our limiting beliefs. And in this book they call it dysfunctional beliefs, but they're just things that come up for all of us, so that block us from moving forward. So it's things like, I should know what makes me happy, or I'm not going to be able to get another job. I have too much experience, or nobody's going to pay me the salary that I'm looking for, or what if I'm not happy in my next role? So all of those things come up, and so I help clients reframe some of those limiting beliefs and thoughts that are coming up for them and look at it from a different perspective so they can get past those and move on. Designers also no, it's a process for design thinking. And that's something when I'm talking to people right up front and we're deciding if it's a good fit for us to work together, I do say it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Um, there are a lot of steps that we need to take to build on one another and find answers. But I know for me, when I'm working with clients, with every session that we have, they're always closer to getting to the answer that feels good for them. But sometimes it's happens quicker than others. It really just depends. And I help them work through that. But knowing that it's a process is helpful. And then the last one is asking for help and collaborating, which is a huge one. And that's something that when I look back on my own career, I wish I would have reached out and asked for more help in terms of trying to figure out really what was the best next step for me. So that's why I'm here, and is just collaborating with clients and working with them to figure it out.
Yeah, I think the book kind of came to you um, at just the right time. I think there's a quote, I don't know who it's from, but when the learner is ready, the teacher will appear, kind of thing.
Ooh.
So, you were kind of talking a little bit about your passion for assessments and how you've seen and used assessments as a mother of teenagers, and that this group, teenagers in general, tend to be at a crossroads as they're coming up with, what their identity is, and there's so much emotions as they mature. So trying to help them navigate that space, and then kind of feeling that struggle, and that book comes along to say, okay, here's something that we've used with college students, yet another crossroads in a person's life. And I think maybe that came at just the right time. And as you dived into it, it's not like you just read the book, it's like you became a student of it and really immersed yourself in it. And this book that you had mentioned, the is it called Design Your Life?
Yep, it's called Designing Your Life. And there's also an additional one that they've written called Designing Your Work Life. So it's geared more toward experienced professionals, not necessarily just college students, but it still uses a design thinking process.
So this book, the Designing Your Life, was recommended to me probably about 4 or 5 years ago, by a peer whose children were coming out of the college timelines, and he had read this book with them and really helped them kind of find purpose in life through it. And then we were starting to recruit, and we had a pretty young team, and there was very high potential people on our team that we knew were going to go on to do different things within the organization or even outside our organization. So he was using this approach kind of as their mentor to guide those young individuals in their career paths, through healthcare and into maybe other things. So this, talking to you, this is not the first time the book has come up to me. It's just I wasn't and probably still I'm not ready to learn from this book just yet. So
Mhm.
hopefully people hear this episode and maybe there's some things that resonate with them. Um, but if it's not the time, it's not the time. But if it is, take this book up as a resource, and definitely take Marla or someone like Marla who does ask questions and help people in career transitions to think through the answer of those hard questions. They're very valuable resources. So
Mm.
I can't say enough good things about having a Sherpa per se when you are starting something new. And I think what you mentioned, those elements, they having the guide like you, Marla, to help keep you curious and excited and take inventory of the things that are true, and not really an head trash per se. So, being curious, but also being confident in reframing any limiting beliefs you might have. I love the experimentation piece, how you help to facilitate someone's discovery of other potential careers by connecting them with um, people who are doing that work and are willing to share their experience and tell their stories,
Mhm.
and getting to try on a career that way. That's, to me, that's a lot better way to see if a career is going to fill your cup than to take the job and find out later it didn't. Is to
Yeah.
have a conversation with someone who's doing that work, and get to ask that person questions about what it's like. And then collaborating, I think at the start you talked a little bit about masterminds,
Mhm.
and collaborating is great because you go from this individual genius to a collective genius, so there's a lot more inputs, there's a lot more eyes on the problem, and as a result of that, different the outcomes tend to be different because things become more creative when you're collaborating. But the other good part of this collaboration is there's accountability that arises and motivation as well. So that's another, I'd say, benefit of working with a guide through any transition is the accountability piece.
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a coach myself because just having that person to bounce ideas off of, keep me, like I said, keep me accountable, keep me sane sometimes, because I think as business owners and working on our own, and now, a lot of us working from home, it's easy to get stuck up in our own heads, and then we just get stuck. And so, um, I've recognized that about myself. That is so helpful. I'm actually part of I have a coach, and we do some individual coaching, and then I'm actually part of a mastermind group as well. And it's been so helpful. I mean, you just get answers so much quicker than, if I'm stuck on a problem, and sometimes it's a business type of problem, like how do I do this, or how do I figure this out, and then someone in our group would be like, oh well, I've done that, just give me a call, I'll work you through it. And so instead of spending hours of trying to figure it out myself, and for me probably spending time on the weekends doing it, I can just call this other person who's in my group, and we're going to do a half an hour call, and I've got it figured out. So that's the power of having people around you to work through some of those things. Is it just saves time from other people's experience and knowledge.
Yeah, tapping into a coach and then also tapping it into a community is definitely very wise investment. I would, what the return you get is much greater than what you put into it in regards to the coaching fees or the membership. Those people, they really are wonderful resources, and they have experience, that you can benefit from, and oftentimes with that experience comes a shortcut to maybe work through a process quicker than you would have been able to work through alone, and or work through a problem. You had shared like maybe a business problem that someone else had already solved. Like, hey, copy and paste. If it works, that's great. It saves you a lot of headache and heartache. And then the other thing in working with a coach is they have a process, and I think you'd mentioned that before. That's kind of the other part of the book. You talked about the designer's mindset, and having curiosity, reframing the problem, being open to experimenting and collaborating. That's definitely, you have to be open minded. And so you got to come with a designer's mindset, but then there's also the design process. And you kind of said when you work with your code, your clients, you're you're walking them through this process. And the next big piece of it is trusting that process because it
Mhm.
unfolds one step at a time and it may not make sense at the start of the journey, but as things compound and build up, that all starts to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've learned over the course of my career, and also what I've learned from talking with just colleagues and peers and clients, is that many of us, and it's no fault of our own. I did it myself because life happens. And so we get into roles or we get into careers and we get into jobs and we work hard and it's heads down and we just go. And so, and then one day we look up and it's like, whoa, how did I get here? The time, the years go by faster than we think, which is really cliche, but it is true. And that happened to me. It was, if I could look back and kind of give myself my own advice, it would really be to take some time, even monthly. I tell when I do presentations and talk with people, I do give this advice a lot because I would have given it to myself of maybe even a month. Look back on the month. How was work going? How did you feel about it? Is it resonating for you? Are you still in alignment with the work that you're doing? Does it feel good? Are you ready for your next challenge? Are you bored? What kinds of conversations could you be having? Or even thinking a little bit about the future. What we don't do is stop and reflect and kind of adjust where we are. And so then what happens is we end up, maybe being in an organization or a career for 25, 30 years, and then get to a point where we're like, whoa, what just happened? Um, and I'm ready to do something next, but I have no idea what that is. So we, when I first start working with clients, we do a lot of under the hood work and figuring out what's really going on underneath and what the person's strengths are now, what their values are now. Kind of like I said, what they know that they don't want to do again, what they know they're really good at. And many times they just haven't taken the time to really figure that out. I mean, like I said, life happens. And so it's something that just we don't do very often. And so I can help them work through that too, and which is what I really enjoy. So that's step one for me in the career design thinking process. And in the actual design thinking, it's called problem finding. So it's it's figuring out, kind of having that foundation of, all right, who are you? What's really going on now? And uncovering uh, the foundation of who the person is.
I think that guidance to have planned pausing, like uh, just take a moment to reflect and answer these questions allows you to kind of stay connected to what's going on around you in your career, and it gives you the opportunity to take ownership of it instead of just going with it. I think there needs to be a balance of flowing with the experiences you're having, but
Mhm.
also thinking big picture, so it's not always zoomed in, but a mix of zooming in and zooming out to kind of stay connected to what you're doing and making sure what you're doing is in alignment with what you want to be doing. And you're, like you'd said, there's so many people who are heads down and so zoomed in, and they eventually become zoned out.
Yeah, and something that happens over the course of our careers, and I think it probably happens for most people, it certainly happened for me, was, when we first start out and we're young and we're just sponges, we want to learn everything we can. We're going to do everything we can to just absorb information and help people. Our roles, typically entry level kinds of positions, are our roles are to help our bosses or our leaders be the best that they can be. Um, but unfortunately, throughout that process, we sort of lose ourselves because we're so focused on trying to help everybody else, at that time, and also learning who we are. But there does come a point where you've absorbed as much information as you can, and you've learned as much as you can, and then it's time um for you to kind of figure out who you are and what you want out of your career at that point. And that happened to me not only in my career but marriage too, where you're just doing what you need to do, and you're going throughout the day and you're helping everybody else, and then um you whatever there might be an event that happens or something happens where you realize, or start asking the questions, what do I really want? And who am I, and what makes me happy? And those are things that sometimes it takes a little while to get there and takes time to reflect on some of those things. And that's what I help clients with as well, is what does really make you happy? What does success look like for you at this point? And it's okay if success looks different than somebody else, or it's okay if success looks different than what somebody told you it looked like when you were 25 or 30 years old. So things can change throughout the years too, and we have to redirect and readjust according to our lives and sometimes just our age.
I think life phases and you kind of combining this work for helping people strategize their career and also appreciating the life that that career is creating is really unique because a lot of people think what they when they go to work they're one person and when they come home they're another person, and that's just not possible. You're one person throughout. So your approach of connecting those two and helping that person connect those two has got to be extremely valuable.
Yeah, and it's one of I mean, it's just something I love to do, and I know that it's needed because I experienced it myself. So yeah, I do. And I have with the design thinking, it makes it um nice to have that framework to walk clients through the process, because it gives them some clarity and confidence, and knowing that there are steps that we can build upon to find some of the answers that they're looking for.
It's such a hard thing to do, but it's a worthwhile thing to do, to be asked these questions and try to answer them, right? Like, and not rush through them, any questions that are
Yeah.
asked when you're in transition, but really roll your sleeves up and look within, practice empathy for yourself, and you know, uh, answer these questions in a way that help you plot that next step in a logical way, so that it's not all doing your next step based on analytics or based on emotion, but kind of bringing both of those things together to plot your next steps using your head and your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing that you're right, we grow and change and learn from our experiences throughout the years. And so, um, where we were at 25 years old is not the same where we are at 40, in terms of just thinking about what is meaningful to us.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think in addition to design, the use of design thinking to plot your career path. And I had a friend, I was doing a design sprint, and it was about an organization going through transition and trying to understand how people were going to react to the changes that were occurring in the environment. And
Mhm.
he said, with all this changes in the business, it actually creates a lot of opportunity for professional growth. And I think if people look at that growth as, what does this mean for my career? They're going to miss the point. He said, in fact, I think we should call it a happiness path instead of a career path. And that hit me um, in a really unique way, because I was a little bit older. I was not any longer early in my career, but I was to the point where I was wanting that from my work, was joy and happiness. And, I think that, that's in some ways what you're helping to create for people, is not just a career path, but a happiness path.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you've used the word connected a few times, and I use the word aligned all of the time. But those are pretty much the same when when you're not feeling connected to the work that you do. there is sometimes that can cause some problems. And then I work with clients to figure out what is the disconnect exactly and how'd you get here? And then what do you need to get connected again and aligned with your work? Going back to assessments, I use the Strengths Finder assessment a lot too. It's one of my favorites to use when we're starting out to talk about careers because the Strengths Finders is so unique to each individual, and it really allows people to really kind of own who they really are. One thing that I found with just coaching and career coaching in general is it's hard. We have so many people, especially within our professional environment, sometimes a work environment, that have expectations of us and judge us and make comments. I mean, I've had people, I've had bosses and leaders make comments to me about, you're not a great salesperson or you're not good at closing or things like that. And that can affect somebody for the rest of their, sometimes it's like this snide comment, but it can affect your thinking for the rest of your life. And so sometimes I have clients coming to me, and one client that I'm thinking of had a boss tell her she's too sensitive, or she overthinks too much and she needs to get better at that. Well, it turns out that that's who she is. When we did the Strengths Finder, she is an analytical person. One of her top strengths is analytical, which is a value. You bring that to an organization. And, for you and I who bring eyes, we need those analytical people behind us because we're not going to analyze. I mean, at least I'm not.
Yep.
So when it comes to, and then so she was feeling a lack of confidence and just like, yeah, I overanalyze too much. I think through. My boss told me that. Well, actually, no, that's who you are. And that's how you add value to an organization. Unfortunately, you're just not in the right spot where you can use those strengths appropriately. And so that's how I help them work through um, just where we're stuck from what other people have told us or expected of us.
There's just so many things to love about this episode, and I'm going to try to summarize them. And I think a couple of key takeaways for me is that element of curiosity, and the idea of using design thinking to design your life, um, is something that puts you in a designer's mindset to be curious and to answer the hard questions that really allow you to connect or be more aligned with what you're doing and what you want to be doing. So that's, kind of opening the door in some ways, is that initial, where am I? And is this where I want to be? Or is there somewhere else I'd rather be? And that then creates the opportunity to do something different. And that is really important to kind of help people realize that change is necessary. Now, how you go about change can be very terrifying, right? And it can cause failure to launch or idleness. So you, of course, have to remain curious, but you also have to address the limiting beliefs that maybe are keeping you where you're at and preventing you from being capable of change. So working through and reframing those beliefs, just as you had shared this individual who had seen their overthinking has a weakness, to reframe it to say, no, that's your greatest asset, right? So reframing those things, going out and experimenting and trying on a couple of different things to see what you enjoy doing, and making sure that it's aligned with what you want to be doing, and connecting with people who do that and hearing their stories and relating to those people not only is going to help you experiment and try on different careers, it's going to expand your network, which is a benefit in itself, is getting to meet more people and gain new perspectives. And then being open to feedback, and making decisions about, does that feedback align? Is it true? Does it resonate? Or is that something I should be ignoring? But as you go out and you try something, if it's not working, you need to know that, and you can never know that unless you're getting feedback, some form of feedback loop through others. A trusted group of people say, hey, I've been trying this for a while, have you seen any changes in my attitude or whatnot? And tell me honestly, because sometimes you're so zoomed in, you're not realizing that maybe you're becoming a different person.
Yeah.
So having a community of people that help you stay connected and hold you accountable to walk on this journey. So, I tried to kind of summarize it in it's not easy because there was so many good things that you talked about during this episode. Was there anything I missed?
No, I think you did a great job of summarizing. I think, from my perspective and my experience and how I also working with my clients, I think, my biggest takeaway is knowing that our careers go through change and growth, and it's a process of learning, and we're supposed to be that way. And taking time to reflect on where you're going is so important. So I think that's one thing I wanted to, make sure that audience members walk away with, is just to, even if it's once a quarter, just spend some time thinking about what's happened over the last 3 months. Um, is it working? Is it not working? And, group go from there.
I love it.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job summarizing.
All right. Thank you. Marla, I cannot thank you enough for coming on to the episode and sharing your passion for helping individuals create a career strategy and the way in which you do it. I love how you're combining the design process into it, but also helping people to integrate their work passion and their life goals.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed sharing my passions as well.
Awesome. Thank you.